number 78 featured Napoleon himself in their segment, Little Known Facts About Famous People. Max Bravo, the Happy Hussar, appeared in the Amalgamated Plus and Son comic by Michael Butterworth from 1954 to 1957. Its title character, Max, is fooled into signing up and through a series of mishaps will rise up to the ranks and even befriend Napoleon himself. Amazing High Adventures by Marvel in 1985 by Al West featured Napoleon in issue number 3, where he personally intervenes to quell superstitions about his troops during the Egyptian campaign. Other tales of war at this time involved the Spanish Civil War and graphic classics published by Eureka Pub Productions and written by Antonio Caputo and artist Nick Miller about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Brigadier General. One of Doyle's lesser-known works, outside of Sherlock Holmes, the general was Etienne Gerard, and a possibly vain hussar officer in the French army in the Napoleonic Wars. Told over 17 short stories, it was meant to be a historical satire, with Doyle making fun of both the French and the English with Gerard's antics. Caputo and Miller continued this tradition by having Gerard ruin the Duke of Wellington's fox hunt. Frontline Combat number 10 in 1953 featured the Battle of Austerlitz by George Evans, detailing Napoleon's greatest military victory and tactical genius as he defeated the combined forces of both the Austrian and Russian armies on December 2, 1805. Valor dealt with the French Revolution in its first issue, detailing the events that led to Napoleon's eventual takeover of France with a story of a Haitian slave outwitting his generals. While Valor was a notable book from EC, it is less regarded as being part of the company's faded new direction, which came just before it went under. A far more popular EC war book was Two-Fisted Tales, which featured multiple war stories of all eras, lasting from 1950 to 1955. A bi-monthly book, it would run for 24 issues in total, featuring writing by William Gaines and art by Harvey Kurtzman. Kurtzman was notable for his meticulous research, giving highly detailed drawings of weapons and troops at the time, whether the story was about World War II or the Roman Empire. He was also notable for his anti-war stance, as Kurtzman never wanted to glamorize war in the series, believing it a disservice to the readers. Kurtzman also created and edited Two-Fisted Tales' sister book, Frontline Combat, also at EC, another bi-monthly war comic premiering on July-August of 1951 and lasting to January 1954 for 15 issues. Like Two-Fisted Tales, Frontline continued Kurtzman's anti-war themes with issue number 4 of that series in 1952, featuring one of his favorite stories called Airburst, about a North Korean mortar patrol during the Korean War. Unique not only in taking the perspective of enemy troops, but also in refusing to depict the North Koreans in a racist manner, it remains a classic comic book story to this day, and one of the many examples of how EC Comics was a truly progressive company at the time. When the comic was ended in 1954, it would be replaced by EC with Aces High on March-April of 1955, another bi-monthly comic that was part of the New Direction line. Which is notable also in continuing its anti-war stance, it featured the talent of Al Feldstein and Wally Wood. Unfortunately, like the rest of the New Direction line, it will be canceled after just 5 issues. However, like many of EC's great traditions, Warren Publishing would continue the line of realistic anti-war comics with Blazing Combat, which was produced on October 1965 and lasted July of 1966 for 4 issues. Edited by Archie Goodwin, it would feature numerous great artists, including some from EC, such as Reed Crandall and Joe Orlando. Like with the rest of Warren's comics, it avoided the CCA by being published as a black and white magazine, thus outside the comic book format. Despite these efforts, the series would have a short run, notably in the anti-war tale Landscape in issue number 2, which gave an sympathetic plight of an elderly Vietnamese farmer while casting the U.S. military in a negative light. It led to the book being banned from military bases, which was a large chunk of its leader base, with a boycott by the American Legion. Nevertheless, the series today is fondly remembered as one of the best war comics ever produced. Of course, the New World, which would later become America, would be ripe for war and conflict, and comic books had plenty of tales to tell about them. One story was from Independent Press was Jack Jackson, under the pseudonym Jackson, of Ripoff Press Comics, who produced graphic biographies of notorious outlaw John Wesley Hardin and Lost Cause, John Wesley Hardin, the Taylor-Sutton feud in the Reconstruction of Texas in 1998, and also Sam Houston, one of the founders of Texas, and the story Indian Lover, Sam Houston and Cherokees in 1999. Jackson also produced The Alamo, an epic told from both sides in 2002, an authoritative and unsentimental look at the legendary battle in Los Tejanos in 1981, which covers 40 years of the Mexican and Texas warfare through the eyes of John Juan Chagrin. Comanche Moon in 1979 detailed the death of the Comanche tribe. Outside of Texas, Comic Cuts did The Mohawk Trail by British artist Ron Embleton, produced in 1951 and 1952, about early frontier wars between the British and French colonial American. In 1953, Rogers Rangers was produced by Ron Embleton, about an independent infantry unit attached to the British Army during the French and Indian War. A real unit during the war, it was led by Major Robert Rogers, who trained his men in light infantry tactics for use in reconnaissance and special operations, and were highly successful because of it. The legendary unit remains the standard for special military operations to this day, inspiring British, Canadian, and U.S. forces, most notably today's U.S. Army Rangers, who still use the Rogers rules for ranging. These stories would also appear in, of all places, Disney's Mickey Mouse Weekly, where Ron Embleton told the story of Donald Drums, which also featured Rogers Rangers. Indian Summer was also produced in 1983 by Hugo Pratt and Milo Manara, about the strained early relations between the colonists and Native Americans. Masterfully told, it shows how the differing views between colonists and Native Americans, whom the colonists call Indians, led to a short, bloody, and tragic war. Of course, the American Revolutionary War was ripe for comic book adaptations, with Pell's Point in 250 Tales No. 28, 1952, by Wally Wood, about how George Washington and his troops escaped Manhattan, considered one of the turning points of the war. John Severin also did a George Washington story in issue No. 29, which finds the general broken and ignored after failing to rally his troops, highlighting one of the low points of the American Revolution. E.C. had previously addressed the American Revolution in 1946 in Picture Stories of American History No. 2. Charlton would somehow adapt the 1776 musical in 1973 with Tori Torlaco and Joe Gill as well. Give Me Liberty was produced by Ripoff Press, a satire of the Revolution for the bicentennial, featuring cartoonists like Gary Hallgren, Will Murphy, Ted Richards, and Gilbert Shelton. Herbie No. 8 in 1965 also mocked Paul Revere. Published by American Comics Group, ACG, and written by Richard Hughes, writing as Shane O'Shea, with art by Odin Whitney, the story had the title character involved in the American Revolution, where he is the one to carry out Paul Revere's ride when his laundry doesn't arrive. Most notably of the comics about the Revolutionary War era was Tomahawk from DC, which lasted from September-October of 1950 to May-June of 1972. The character was previously featured in Star Spangled Comics number 69 on June 1947, created by Joe Simaxon and Edmund Good. Known as Tom Hawk or Thomas Hawkins, he was a soldier who served under George Washington during the French and Indian War, and will later serve again with Washington during the American Revolution, leading his Tomahawk Rangers. By issue number 35 and 36 in November of 1955, the character even met a young Davy Crockett, the cash-in of the popular TV show at the time, though not quite historically accurate, as Crockett wasn't even born then. In issue number 81, it helped establish that Tomahawk was part of the larger DC universe when it introduced Miss Liberty, who was the ancestor of DC heroine Liberty Bell. The series would last for 140 issues before ending in 1972, and the character has made sporadic appearances in DC ever since. On the independent comics front, Journey by Aardvark Vachon in 1983 introduced Wolverine McAllister, a 19th century trapper. Written and drawn by Bill Messner-Loebs, he would later do a follow-up series, Journey War Drums for Fantagraphic Books, which was about the War of 1812. Northeast Passage by Scott Chancellor and Oni Press came out in 2005 about a small trading company in what was then known as Rupert's Landing in 1755, an area that was coveted by both the British and French during the war. Davy Crockett and the Alamo would be a popular character and event, and with the success of the Disney serial in the 1950s, nearly every comic publisher found a way to cash in on his name. Davy Crockett at the Alamo was featured in 1955 in issue number 639 of Dell's four-color series. Jim Bowie, another popular figure from the Alamo, also featured in comic books, such as Classic Illustrated number 129 in 1955, while the Two-Done Kid in number 75 in 1965 at Marvel also referenced the Alamo. With the American Civil War, nearly every medium adapted tales of conflict, and comic books were no exception. EC's Two-Fisted Tales in Frontline Combat, with artist Arvid Kurtzman, hoped to chronicle the complete history over 7 issues of the series, but ultimately only produced 3. Wayne Van Sant adapted the classic Red Badge Occurs by Stephen Crane in 2005, about a young soldier struggling to fight in the Civil War. Van Sant previously produced comic book adaptations of Antietam, Sherman's March through the Atlanta to the Seas, Stonewall in the Shenandoah, Shiloh, and Gettysburg for Heritage Collection 1990s. Marvel produced Epic Battles of the Civil War in 1998, which also covered various battles throughout the Civil War, from Bull Run to Shiloh and Antietam over 4 volumes. The series featured various artists, with George Woodward's art on Gettysburg's story being a highlight, as he was a Civil War buff and a popular artist from Mad Magazine. The Frontier Wars were also covered, giving a bit of a crossover with the Western genre. All-Star Western, the DC anthology that ran from May 1951 to July of 1961 in the first volume and later revived in September of 1970 to May of 1972. While mostly dealing with Western stories, a popular character who crossed both genres in the series was Jonah Hex, an ex-Confederate soldier whose face is horribly scarred and becomes a bounty hunter in the West. First appearing in All-Star Western number 10 on February-March of 1972, he was created by John Albano and Tony DeZunga. The character has made consistent appearances throughout DC, including appearing in the Batman the Animated Series and DC Legends of Tomorrow. Hex even got a movie adaptation, Jonah Hex, on June 18, 2010, with Josh Brolin in the title role, but the less said about that film, the better. Highlights of History, a popular newspaper strip by J. Carroll Mansfield, featured a legendary frontiersman Kit Carson in 1931, who served as a scout in both the Mexican and American War and the American Civil War. Of course, he will also be featured in numerous Western comic books throughout the 1940s and 50s, along with other big names like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp, who had a 34-issue run in Atlas. With World War I, otherwise known as the Great War, it was another source of storage for comic books. Some notable works was by an actual World War I veteran, Bruce Bairnsfather. Originally a member of the Cheshire Regiment after graduating from Sandhurst, he resigned in 1907 to become an artist. However, with the outbreak of World War I, he joined the Royal Warwickshire Regiment in 1914 as a second lieutenant, serving in a machine gun unit in 1915. He would be hospitalized in 1915 from shell shock and hearing loss after the Second Battle of Europe. While recovering, Bairnsfather created the strip Bystanders, starring Old Bill, a curmudgeonly soldier serving in the trenches. These works were recreated in Fragments from France in 1914 and the autobiographical Bullets in 1916. The character of Old Bill would become so popular that his mustache look reportedly inspired the name of the Old Bill mustache British police officers started to don after the war. Old Bill would become the subject of numerous plays, musicals, and films, while Bairnsfather produced an autobiographical Wide Canvas in 1939. During World War II, Bairnsfather continued the Old Bill strip while contributing to Stars and Stripes magazine and Yank, and even provided cartoons for military bases and nose art for aircraft. Bairnsfather would die in 1959, finding himself ultimately typecast as the creator of Old Bill, though his art reportedly inspired Bill Mauldin, a World War II cartoonist, but more on him when we get to that war. IPC magazines produced Battle Picture Weekly on March 1975 with less than 199 issues until January 1988. During its run, it would be known as Battle Action Force, Battle, and Battle with Storm Force, running for a total of 673 issues before merging with the revived Eagle magazine. While mostly featuring stories about World War II, it addressed numerous other conflicts, and World War I was no exception. In issue number 200 on January 6, 1979, it introduced Charlie's War by writer Pat Mills and Joe Coughlin, about Charlie Bourne, a 16-year-old kid who volunteers in World War I. The series would last till October 4, 1986, and follow Charlie from a gung-ho kid ready to fight to slowly becoming jaded from his involvement in the Battle of Somme, Europe, and the final advance in 1918. It was a realistic and harsh strip, showing the reality of the gas attacks and tank battles, while demonstrating stories of heroes and cowardice on both sides. The series would end with Charlie reluctantly re-enlisting in the British Army in 1940, with the outbreak of World War II after his son Lynn joins before finally deciding he has had enough of war. The strip today is still considered one of the greatest war comics of all time, to the point that the 2006 reprint of the series received the Eagle nomination. A comic book that took on a little-known but powerful event of World War I was White Death by writer Robbie Morrison and artist Charlie Adlard in 1988, detailing how 60,000 Italian troops were killed when buried in a deliberately triggered avalanche in 1916 in the Trentino Mountains, a border area between Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Taking place from the perspective of Pietro Agustin, he grew up in the area and is charged with setting the very charges that destroy the enemy. It remains a powerful story about the senselessness of war through the eyes of an ordinary soldier. One of the innovations of World War I came with warfare was that it was the first to significantly feature aerial combat, whether it being dogfights or bombings. EC Comics series 250 Tales of Frontline Combat has such stories, as did Aces High in 1955, which specialized in tales of fighter pilots. Issue number 4 features the story of George Evans, whose meticulous research also again paid off about an officer harassed by a subordinate over his cavalier treatment of life. And with that, we will conclude this episode for now, but we will continue in the history of war and war comic books as we continue into World War I and eventually into World War II, which will be one of the biggest subjects in